So I am taking a break from my series uncovering what my system is going to be changing about certain classes. And I'd like to talk to you all about something that I have seen recently, and I just want to talk about it. Just a little rant, like in the old days. So I was scrolling through my YouTube recommended feed, as you do, and I saw a video by this lady. I see her all the time. She makes all these videos about like how to play D&D, how to play a bard, stuff like that. I forget the channel name. Once I find it, I'll link it in the description below. But in the video, just in the title, I can tell what her points are going to be. Just by the title, based on how it's worded and how she starts it with the subtitles on, I can tell what her points are going to be. The title of the video is Dungeons and Dragons is not improv. It is not improv. And she starts by saying, in D&D, there is no really yes and situations. And in case you aren't aware, in improv, there is this notion known as the yes and exercise, where you present a situation and then the person that you're presenting it to says yes and you have to continue it until they deem that the situation that you have presented is sufficient enough to go about performing some form of skit or exercise or what have you. And what bugs me about that statement that D&D is not improv isn't that there is no improv in roleplay. It's not that. Roleplay is improv. There's no getting around that. Roleplay is improv because there are things that the DM is not going to be prepared for. There are things that the players are going to do that there aren't rules for. There's no text for it. Or if it is, it's buried so deep into some obscure book that not a lot of people have, and it's in an obscure section that nobody knows about, or in like a little cliff note like, hey, you know, if this situation comes up, here's like the most bare bones ruling that you could use if the situation comes up, like destruction rules for objects. So the thought that improv, like D&D is not improv in roleplay, is factually incorrect, because there's a lot of things in D&D that nobody's going to be prepared for. Are you telling me that as a dungeon master, you know 100% of the time what your players are going to be doing all the time, and that you have prepared for literally anything and everything all of the time? You have prepared for the barbarian to, instead of going through the door, to bust down 3 walls to go into the boss room immediately, ignoring everything because you set up everything to be anti-magic. But he's not magic, so who cares? You've accounted for that. You've accounted for the fact that the rogue may just be able to undo all of your traps. You've calculated for the fact that the wizard may have spells that counteract your magical effects, or that they're so powerful it doesn't matter. You as a dungeon master have literally accommodated for anything and everything that anybody can ever think of ever. And there is no room for improv anywhere because you have thought of everything. You have the rules for everything. If you think that, I'm sorry, you're delusional. There is no world in which any dungeon master can prepare for anything and everything. You can only prepare for what you cannot prepare for. You prepare for everything to go wrong. Never prepare for everything to go right. Prepare for everything to go wrong. That is to say, basically just prepare the most bare bones idea of what your session is going to be, but never set anything in stone. An example would be, don't say, alright, so last session the party was in room 1, and in this session they're going to go to room 2, and then they're going to go to the boss room in room 3, they're going to go through these traps, they're going to they're going to fight these enemies, and it's going to take this amount of time, and they're going to get to the boss, and it's going to take this many rounds based on this, and then once it's done, they're going to get this loot. It's already predetermined. But then they go, alright, so instead of going through room 2, we're just going to use an item to teleport us to room 3 immediately. Well, now your entire session is now shorter, so now you have to come up with something. And you either have to move enemies from room 2 to room 3. You can't prepare for that. You cannot prepare for that. But I digress. What bugs me in her statement was that D&D is not improv, and roleplay obviously is. There's no getting around that, but that nothing in D&D is improv. Nothing at all. Not roleplay, not the mechanics, nothing. When this person has openly played 5th edition on more than one occasion, which I would argue is the most improv-heavy system ever. There are so many things in the game that require DM ruling, or DM hand-waving, or a Mother May I situations where you have to ask the DM if you can do something, that it basically is improv. D&D 5th edition, I would argue, is the most improv TTRPG system ever created. Ever created. Because it tries to be mechanically dense, but fails, and so it has to supplement it with improv from the DM to supplement their lack of rules. But in other games where it's nothing but improv, where you have a system that encourages you to do things, and the GM says, yeah, sure, go right ahead, because that's in the parameters of what the rules say is possible, but it's very ambiguous as to what that means, so it can happen. Examples of that would be something like Blaze in the Dark, 10 Candles, City of Mist, things that they describe how events could be played out. So like an example would be if you're up against something like Lex Luthor, the equivalent of Lex Luthor, and your party busts in and they want to thwart his plans, and your Iron Fist character comes in and he's like, so what I want to do is I want to go up to Lex Luthor and punch the knowledge right out of his head. Not kill him, just literally punch every sense of intelligence out of his head. You'd be like, you as the game master would be like, well, you can make an attack and you have magical effects, and in this scene you can pretty much do anything that would be within the realm of possibility for either your character or for the world I have set forth. And since this is something that you would be able to do, I'd say yes, you can do that, because the rules state that you can. Yes, it is up to me as the GM to kind of hand wave and say, yes, you can, but the fact that the rules encourage you to do it instead of saying, well, you see, we don't actually have rules for it, but we kind of do, but we kind of don't. So, if you do, you can, but if you don't, you don't have to. The kind of wishy-washy way that 5th edition does it, where they have rules in place for things to occur, and they are concrete rules, but then they have rules in place for things to happen, but then they have a little cliff note that says, yeah, it's up to DM discretion, though. It'd be like saying, hey, in 5th edition, it'd be like if you were reading through the 5th edition book, and it said, hey, so, you know how armor class is the rating in which it is difficult for characters to hit each other, or for your monsters to hit the players, or vice versa? And then you're like, yeah. And then they respond, well, it's actually up to DM discretion that armor class represents that. It can actually just be armor class is just an arbitrary number that doesn't matter at all, and the enemies just hit you or miss you based on what the DM says. He could just say, yeah, that hits, and he doesn't even have to tell you anything. They could roll a 1, and they could still hit you, because DM fiat. The DM discretion says so. It'd be like that. The rules, they have a very concrete rule in place, but then they just hand wave it like, no, the DM can actually just do whatever they want. They want to have a open skeletal system where it is, this can be used for anything and everything, but they have rules that contradict it, or they place rules in the book that would contradict a open skeletal gameplay system, but then they add in rules, they add in like little text that say, oh, you don't have to if your DM doesn't want to. And that ends up with a situation where if you're playing the game as the designers intended for you to interact with the system, then you end up having conflicting rules because you don't know which one you're supposed to follow, because it's all based on DM discretion. Do you like this rule or do you not? Do you want to play it as written or not? Do you want to use this rule? Do you want to use this rule? Do you not? There's no rules in place that tell you when you should and should not use these things. The exception are setting books like Eberron that state, unless you are taking place, unless your session or roleplay or whatever is taking place in Eberron, you should not. It is not recommended that you use Artificer or any of the races in this book or anything in this book, because it is Eberron specific. But if you do want to do it and it doesn't matter to you, you can. And that's fine. I think personally that is a good way to do it. Have system or have setting specific benefits for being in the setting, and then inform the DM that doing so will imbalance the game in some way or introduce a factor that they had not previously accounted for, but then allow them to say, no, we're not doing that. Do you want to play an Artificer, but my session isn't taking place in Eberron? Well, too bad. Pick a different class, because we're not using Artificer because it's not in Eberron. And the book encourages it. And then when they released it later in Tasha's Cauldron, they completely reworked that. And they said, nope, now it's available everywhere, because people got pissed at that. But it's a much better way, because if you're going into the system and there is a setting that you want to play, you should have something specific to that setting that makes it different and unique. If you make everything universal, but also make everything not universal at the same time, you end up having a conflicting intention with the game and how you're meant to interact with it. And I don't think that is a good way to add mechanics, and that's not a good way to make a game. Improv, as it stands, is D&D. There is nothing in the rules that is stopping you as the Dungeon Master from saying, yeah, we're playing D&D 5th edition, but we're not playing 5th edition. There's nothing stopping you from doing it, because the book openly says that everything in any book is open to interpretation and up to DM discretion. You can literally just say, I'm playing 5th edition, but instead of playing anything in 5th edition, we're actually using the 4th edition rules, because 5th edition allows me to do that. So I can advertise my game as being in 5th edition, but then trick everybody into playing 4th edition because it's a better game. Because every rule is subject to DM discretion. You can do that. And that's not how a game should be. There should be rules, and it should be very stagnant as to what the rules should be and how you should use those rules, but there should be a little bit of leeway as to how the game master is meant to interact with those rules. But it shouldn't all be, well, you don't have to use any of these, but you can, but if you do, you gotta worry about this, but if you don't really have to worry about this, but then you have like all these other things you gotta worry about. It is a bad way to design a game. It is a bad way. And honestly, I'm with Sabrok on this one, stating that honestly the D&D player base deserves the 2024 release. Because if it's mediocre, which we all know it will be, if anybody is a fan of Cyberrock or myself, you'll know that we are very, very big fans of 4th edition. But I think people like her, who think that improv doesn't exist in D&D and how everything is everything there's no such thing as improv, and that there's no way that anybody should be using the yes and model when that's exactly how they built the system on. I think they deserve the 2024 remake. They deserve to see how little has changed, how little anything about the game has improved, how little any of this impacts, and then realize that they just spent $60 to $70 on a worthless book. I think it's deserved.